Welcome back to The Explainer, everyone. Today, we are going to decode the very web of life that surrounds us. We're looking at the fundamental rules of ecology. Specifically, we're focusing on Section A of the CSEC biology syllabus, living organisms and the environment. So, whether you're prepping for exams or just, genuinely curious about how the natural world actually works, we're going to visually map out the incredibly complex, beautifully intricate, and honestly, sometimes bizarre relationships that make up our living environment. Here's our game plan for today. We're going to categorize the tree of life, explore habitats and ecosystems, track how energy flows, uncover the wild world of symbiosis, and finally, look at how the Earth recycles itself through the carbon cycle. Let's jump right in. All right, Section 1, categorizing the tree of life. Before we can figure out how things interact, we got to know who the players actually are, right? To make sense of the sheer diversity of life out there, scientists classify organisms into taxonomic groups. Now, historically, they did this just by looking at physical similarities, leaf patterns in plants or body segments in animals. At the absolute broadest level, every living thing gets sorted into one of 5 kingdoms. You've got Plantae, which are your plants, Animalia, the animals, fungi, so things like mushrooms and yeast, Prokaryota, which are your bacteria, and Productista, like microscopic amoebas. Now, modern science has actually leveled this up a bit and uses DNA sequences to trace true evolutionary roots, but these 5 kingdoms, they are still the absolute bedrock of biological classification. So, from those massive kingdoms, we filter all the way down through phyla, classes, and so on, until we hit the most basic rank, the species. And you definitely want to lock this definition into your memory. A species isn't just a bunch of animals that happen to look alike. It's a group of individuals with common ancestry that closely resemble each other. And here is the absolutely crucial part. They are normally capable of interbreeding to produce fertile offspring. That fertile offspring bit, that is the ultimate biological line in the sand separating one species from another. Okay, let's dive into this next part. Section 2, habitats, niches, and ecosystems. So we know our cast of characters, but what about the stage they live on? Well, every environment is shaped by 2 totally different sets of factors. First, we have abiotic factors. These are the non-living, chemical, and physical elements. Think temperature, rainfall, and sunlight. Then, you have biotic factors. These are the living components, the other plants, animals, and bugs sharing that exact same space. And the thing is, an organism's survival depends entirely on how well it handles both the abiotic conditions and the biotic pressures around it. If just one of those things shifts, like say the temperature spikes, the entire system feels the shockwave. And this actually brings us to a really common mix-up in biology, the difference between a habitat and a niche. It's actually super simple when you think about it. Your habitat is basically your address. It's the physical location where an organism lives. Maybe it's a specific tree branch, a coral reef, or a little freshwater pond. Your niche, on the other hand, is your profession. It's your specific job within that ecosystem. It includes what you eat, what eats you, and how you interact with literally everything else in your habitat. 2 different species can totally share the same habitat, but they absolutely cannot occupy the exact same niche without competing until one loses. Let's zoom out a bit. When you get a bunch of individuals of one specific species living together in a habitat, that's a population, like all the green frogs in a specific pond. But, those frogs aren't just chilling alone. They share that pond with fish, insects, lily pads, and when you group all those different populations living in that specific habitat together, that whole group is what we call a community. Moving right along to Section 3, food chains and energy. If an ecosystem is like a bustling city, energy is the ultimate currency keeping the lights on. Take a butterfly, for instance. In the grand scheme of things, it's a consumer, specifically an herbivore. But to actually flap those wings and survive day to day, it needs fuel. And it's really fascinating to trace exactly where that energy came from before it ended up as flower nectar. It literally all starts with the sun. The sun beams down light energy, which is then trapped by our producers, the plants, who turn it into chemical energy. After that, consumers, like our butterfly, feed on those producers. Then maybe a bird eats the butterfly, making it a secondary consumer. But here is the kicker, step 4. Energy is lost at every single level. As you move up the food chain, a huge chunk of energy is just lost as heat or through respiration and, excretory activities. Because of this massive energy drain, food chains almost never go past 4 or 5 levels. There literally just isn't enough energy left to sustain anything higher. Now, what's really interesting about this next slide is section 4, the intricacies of symbiosis. Symbiosis is all about how organisms kind of bypass standard competition and form these incredibly tight-knit, bizarre relationships to survive. There are 3 main types you absolutely need to know. First up is parasitism. This is where one wins and the other loses, like ticks sucking blood from a mammal. Second, we have commensalism. This is where one benefits and the other is just completely unbothered. A perfect example is an epiphyte, a plant that grows high up on tree branches just to get better sunlight without actually hurting the tree at all. And finally, mutualism. This is the win-win scenario. Think of nitrogen-fixing bacteria living in the roots of legumes. The plant gets vital nutrients from the bacteria, and in return, the plant gives the bacteria a cozy home and some sugars. Let's put those terms to the test. That epiphyte hitching a ride on a tree branch for sunlight without stealing nutrients? Commensalism. Intestinal worms making a dog sick? Yeah, definitely parasitism. And a remora fish just casually latching onto a shark to eat its leftover food scraps without bothering the shark? Another brilliant example of commensalism. All right, finally, let's talk recycling in section 5, the carbon cycle. Earth is basically a closed system, right? We don't get regular shipments of new carbon or water from outer space. Every single thing has to be recycled. This maps out the carbon cycle beautifully. Just follow the flow here. Trees pull carbon dioxide right out of the atmosphere during photosynthesis. That carbon gets passed into animals when they eat the plants. When those plants and animals eventually die and decompose, some of that carbon goes into the soil, slowly turning into fossil fuels over millions of years. But check out the extraction part. By digging up and burning those fossil fuels, we are rapidly pumping massive amounts of that ancient, stored carbon straight back into the atmosphere, totally short-circuiting the Earth's natural slow recycling loop. And that brings us to the real so what of all this. We've just seen how incredibly balanced and specialized the natural world is, from a basic food chain to those crazy symbiotic bonds. But what actually happens when human activities, things like pollution and rapid climate change, disrupt these biotic and abiotic factors faster than populations can even adapt? How do our actions permanently alter this delicate web of life? It's definitely a profound question to chew on as you continue studying ecology. Thanks so much for joining me for this explainer, and keep on learning.